Yo, this is the ancient Texan. I was telling my son that this supply chain stuff is very real to me, and it's about real people. And I think I have some insight into this on account of my 60 years working in the metals field. And I'm going to tell you one story what it was like to live in the world I've lived in for 60 years. I'm going to take you back to this plant, Amax nickel. It was the biggest hydrometallurgical plant ever built in the United States. We made nickel, copper, cobalt. We had, I would guess, 200 to 300 workers, and then there were contractors that came in and were a big part of the community. I was one of about a dozen engineers. I worked primarily in the cobalt circuit, which we now get from Congo. Uh, and you see those stories about people that are, you know, digging tunnels and tunnels collapsing and using child labor. Well, I used to make that in America. This was the third metallurgical facility I'd worked in my short, 5-year career because plants were being shut down. Let me tell you about, kind of what my job was like. I would be given an area. We had different areas that did different parts of the processing. And I generally got my job was to, write procedures and, you know, teach people how to do the chemistry and that kind of stuff. I was a process engineer. And they had a boss that ran the area and he'd have his foreman and all that. And they kept things going on a routine basis. But when shit hit the fan, um, my boss would tell me, "We're going to turn that area over to you. You're the process engineer. Figure out, why it screwed up, and we got to get it back online, or we're going to shut the whole plant down." Here's kind of how I would do that job. I would go walk into the area early in the morning, right after the shift change. They changed the shift at 7, and I think I started work at 8. Went across this Mississippi on a ferry boat, drove out to the plant, parked my car, got my coffee, messed around a while, and then went over to the area. Maybe my boss gave me a briefing and told me, uh, things are really screwed up over there, and we got to get it fixed. Go see what you can figure out. I would go sit down in the control area where all the instruments were, and you could monitor all what's going on in that section of the plant. These were analog controls. They weren't the nice shiny digital ones, or at least there weren't very many. And I'd sit there, and what I'd do is we'd talk about the football game. Like, say there's a Monday morning, we'd talk about the football game on Sunday. And we would do our Monday morning quarterback and talk all about that, and might, ask how his wife's doing, and isn't he going to have a kid here soon? And he asked me, "Well, how's it going with your wife? I heard you're getting a divorce." Well, we're just separating now. And I tell him about, you know, drop my kid Mike off at the with a lady down the street that's taking care of him. They talk about stuff, just people stuff. Then I might sit there for on a lazy day when not much happened. I might sit there for 30 minutes and shoot the bull. On a day like this one, where I'm talking about, where things are really going south fast, we both know there's another agenda. I finally get around to, that tank TK14. I said the readings we got this morning, when they came, pulled the samples and sent them over to the lab, and then, we pulled them up on our computer. Wow, things are really messed up. And I said, well, all the bosses and stuff are over there trying to figure it out. And I said, I need to, learn something here and figure it out. And he'd tell me, well, here's what happened. Joe last night came into work drunk, and he wasn't paying attention, and he overflowed this other tank, TK8, back there and on the ground. And then he fell asleep and woke up, and all the stuff was all over the floor, and we had cement walls, so it kept it confined. But he said, well, shit, we had to pump it back into the tank that it came out of. But he had the valves all screwed up, and he pumped it into TK14 instead of TK8. So now I got the two tanks mixed up together, and none of us know what to do. Um, I said, well, nobody even knows what happened. And he said, well, we can't say anything about it, or Joe will lose his job. And I said, yeah, but we can't keep doing this. We gotta. So, well, whatever. But Joe can't know that I told you. And I'd say, yep, I understand that. I got it. And then I'd go back over and talk to my boss. And meanwhile, my boss, who knew the chemistry better than me, would come up with all these theories about what went wrong. And of course, doesn't have this missing piece of information, but I can't give it to him because I don't want Joe to get fired. I'm kind of making a mental note. Next time something like this happens, then, you know, I've got to let shit hit the fan, and I've got to do it in some way that my sources don't dry up. But I'd tell my boss, I said, well, there's some things went down not wrong. And he said, well, what happened? Well, I'll get back to you, boss. I'll let you know, but just give me a little while to sort some more stuff out. I'm on it, and I got some information coming in, and I'll get back to you early afternoon, and tell everybody not to worry. So I go back over to the area and say, okay, they're going to give me the control of this area for a while. And I go talk to the boss of that area and the foreman, and I said, they've they've decided to let me control this part of the plant for a while. And oh, sure, you're gonna screw the goddamn thing up already. It's already a big damn mess. We don't need any more hands in the oven or whatever. Well, he would still though, because the bosses said so. I'd be in charge, and I go back down to the workers. So the workers and me are the only one that really know most of the story. So we come down, we talk out a plan, and say we got an empty tank over here. Let's just put all that stuff there. Let's bring in some new stuff from the other plant and get this part of the plant back working again. And then I'll figure out some way to work this in to the main supply, so that we kind of do it a little at a time, and uh, we don't screw up everything. We kind of work it in. We'll work this off. We'll work hard, and we'll get this part of the plant going and running, and then we'll figure out what to do with that other piece later. And just, well, I don't think that's going to work. I said, just do it. Just do it. Just trust me. Do it. So they'd do it. And for the next few days, I would be over there sorting stuff out, going to the lab, getting extra samples. I wasn't supposed to pull samples, and I'd get in trouble with the people because I broke a union rule and pulled samples, and I'd go turn them into the lab, and I'd get someone to run something in the lab for me that's not on the schedule, and they didn't give the results to anybody else. They'd just run it and give it to me. And then I'd come back and I'd tell the guys, yeah, we're making progress. We're sorting this out. And I don't know, 2 or 3 days, we'd kind of work through the problem without me ever really telling my bosses what was going on, and using friendship in the lab to get stuff done, and the workers trusting me to move stuff, because the worse things got there, the more they felt like they're going to get in trouble. And because I was in a position where the workers trusted me and I didn't turn them in, and my bosses trusted me because I knew the chemistry, and they felt like I knew what the hell was going on. And the foreman, even though he grumped at me and yelled at me, uh, after a few times of me sorting it out, he would just say, well, let me know if I can help you. And I'd say, well, keep this part of the plant running and just give me these few tanks in this area within the area, and I'll work on that, and I'll get it sorted out, and I'll let you know how it's going. So by a situation of trust, um, would get it all sorted. Then I'd come in the next morning, after that, I'd sit down and we'd talk about maybe a baseball game, or maybe we would rehash, you know, the game coming up next week, football game, or would, talk about some worker that got fired, or, you know, some change they're making at the plant, or uh, whatever. We just talked about people stuff, because the workers really didn't understand the chemistry. They followed instructions and procedures. Um, the bosses generally worked on the principle of someone screws up, you send them home, or you suspend them or fire them, and then the workers stuck together. That you needed somebody that was just kind of on the inside, um, that understood the whole thing, and that was me. Well, this goes on, and I'm there for almost 3 years. Then word starts coming down that headquarters is shutting us down. I wouldn't have used these words then, but we were going to be outsourced. We were not going to be making nickel, cobalt, and copper in America. Nobody really cared. As the workers say, nobody gives a shit about us, because nobody gave a shit about them. That was the truth. Management cared about making another buck. Now, I had a PhD in engineering, and I'd already had a lot of experience for someone that's in his 30s. I started working when I was 19 in a smelter, and I almost always worked uh, with the people in the plant, and I was comfortable there. I didn't get along with management. Management kept me because I was good. But part of my being good is I cared about the workers. My dad was a car mechanic. Worked with his hands. Always told me, like when I was fixing my bike or something, let me do that. Go read a book and make your living with this. I heard that, but I never. It's like the people I grew up with didn't grow up to be. Most of them didn't grow up to be an engineer. A few in my neighborhood actually followed me into my career, and a couple of them did real well, better than I did, because I never had to cooperate with management stuff. Anyway, word comes down they're shutting it down. Well, I can move on. I've already tied up a job in Anaconda Copper, which at one time was the biggest company in the world. I went to work in their R&D facility, and because I worked in operations at Amax and before that in Southwire, I end up being the one that runs the pilot plants because I have experience in big stuff, and I also understand the R&D stuff, so I can help transition between the R&D and the production. So I say goodbye to these buddies that I have and talk about football with, knowing that they're fixing to be laid off and they don't really have options. They don't have places to go. You know, Vance wrote that book, Hillbilly Elegy. I read that. I related to it. And I tried to talk to, I go to this place, Unitarian Universalists, and we're kind of like church for agnostics. Um, I tried bringing up that Hillbilly Elegy, and because Vance wrote it and he's a Republican, they all said that it wasn't a popular conversation. And I have to admit that that group is mostly Democrats. I know one guy that's not, and he's a libertarian, so he's a tolerable Republican. Um, I tend to be in the middle all the time, but I digress. What I saw at Amax when my buddies lost their job, I saw a dozen other times in my career. I was never in management, the guy that made the decision about shut down, outsource, those kind. They were above my pay grade. I had opinions about it. I still have opinions about it. And on this podcast, you'll get my opinions about almost everything. You know, maybe 50 years too late, but it's still relevant. Right now, I just heard about a China is shutting off our silver supply. We make some silver in the US, and we have a lot of deposits that are waiting for permits that they can't get. Permits that allow them to open up the mine and would have a plant running in 5 years, making money with good jobs. Jobs that let you buy groceries without worrying about inflation. Jobs that let you buy a house and a car, send your kids to college. Good jobs. But it's in what America has decided is a dirty industry. So when I hear about a shortage of silver, it's not an abstraction to me. I hear that Samsung is short of silver to make their phones. Tesla is short of silver to make their cars. Solar company is short of silver to make its panels. You know what I hear? What I see? I see my buddies at Amax walking out the gate without a job, going home to a family they can't put food on the table for. That's what I see. And I don't really care that, Samsung's plants in Korea, but they also have some probably in Mexico and in Texas and all over the place. I don't know. But wherever they are, they're common people going to work, trying to do their job and to feed their family. And because our idiot bosses can't be anything but what they are, and they have to be arrogant and go into deals like they're going to crush the other person, making it a competition. Instead of we're going to cooperate and make jobs together, we're going to have partners in Mexico and in Canada. We all work together and we all keep our jobs. We're going to be idiots and pretend like they need us and they're going to do what we say. That's what we're doing to Canada and Mexico, and it's even what we're doing to China. Now, China's not necessarily a good guy in this whole thing either. They've got their own problems, but that's not the talk today. When I talk about supply chains, I don't just see the metal and the chemistry and the material balance and the energy balance and all those things that I know how to do to help make a plant run better. I see my fellow Americans losing their jobs, good jobs, not having money to put food, buy a house, and that kind of stuff. Because that's what happens. We can't live in this abstract world where we just have AI. AI is good for optimizing. It's a smart. It's like we're going to a really advanced computers where we can just talk in words to the computer and it'll help us optimize something instead of you know putting it in a regression analysis in a spreadsheet. But AI can't optimize the supply chain that doesn't exist. It can't optimize the Tesla plant and make it run more efficient or help them make batteries if the plant doesn't exist. And the plant can stop existing from something as simple as one element, something like silver, to make sure you have good electrical contacts in your batteries if you're Tesla, or if in your memory circuits if you're Samsung phone company. One element, one supply chain not working can shut a plant down. China figured this out a long time ago. They were shutting plants down in America when I was working at Southwire, my first job after my PhD. They understood that supply chains is where the real power is. If you don't control your raw materials and what goes in the front door of your plant, nothing comes out the back door. And we don't need the workers. In America, when they sent plants overseas, the first generation they sent the plant, the second generation the expertise. The only reason that I still consult when I'm pushing 80 is one is I still have my faculties together. And two is most metallurgists got old. There's not a lot of me around. Not a lot of people that know what it takes to make a plant run and operate and know all the pieces of, how the workers and the chemistry and the bosses manage the bosses was always a challenge. Keep the bosses focused instead of, punishing some worker. I would eventually go talk to a foreman somewhere or to the area boss and tell him enough that he'd know to ask the right questions. Because at some point you had to say that, Joe coming in drunks is going to shut everybody down. Anyway, this is the ancient Texan wanting you to know that supply chains mean more to me than just, a shortage of raw materials.